Hi guy, welcome back TV Spoilers. Young and the Restless Spoilers, Lily kept telling herself that staying careful for just a little longer would be enough, that if she could remain disciplined and quiet and precise, the noise in Genoa City would eventually thin out and the pressure would ease. It was the kind of self-talk she relied on when the stakes got high, the kind that sounded calm on the surface, but was really a way of forcing her nerves to stand at attention. On The Young and the Restless, power rarely announces itself with sirens or threats. It slips in through routines, through blind spots, through the small moments when someone believes they're alone. Lily had built a private rhythm lately, a hidden pocket of time and space where she could speak freely, make sensitive calls, and move pieces without feeling eyes on her. That confidence was not arrogance so much as survival. Still, the deeper she leaned on secrecy, the more she began to sense the shadow of something larger closing in, an invisible hand tightening around her plans, her relationships, even her breath. The day it happened, she drove to her chosen location with the kind of focus that turns ordinary streets into a tunnel. She had selected the place carefully, not because she wanted drama, but because she needed control. The call she was about to make mattered. It involved a business strategy delicate enough to collapse if spoken in the wrong earshot, and powerful enough to shift the balance of influence across the city if it succeeded. Lily knew how quickly business turned into war in this town, how a single leak could become a weapon. She also knew that the most dangerous part of being strong was believing strength could replace caution. So she repeated her rules in her head. Keep it short, keep it clean, keep it contained. Then leave, no delays, no improvisation, no emotion. But as she neared the turnoff, a faint discomfort started to rise in her chest, the kind that doesn't have a single clear cause. The road seemed too quiet, the air too still. Lily checked her mirrors, not once but repeatedly, forcing her eyes to scan for the simplest patterns in unfamiliar car keeping the same distance, headlights that didn't change position. A figure where there shouldn't be one. She saw nothing obvious, which should have reassured her. Instead, the absence of proof made her more uneasy, as if whoever might be behind her was skilled enough not to be seen. Lily hated that thought. She hated what it suggested, that someone could be watching without leaving fingerprints, that her safe route could already be mapped by a mind that enjoyed staying one step ahead. She pulled in and parked with care, cutting the engine but leaving her hand on the steering wheel for a beat longer than necessary. That small pause was instinctive, a final chance to decide whether to abandon the plan. She told herself she was overreacting. Pressure could make the body invent threats. She had been carrying too much, juggling too many moving parts, navigating a city where loyalty wore masks. Of course her nerves were loud. She forced a slow inhale, then stepped out, closing the door softly as if sound itself might betray her. The space around her felt open, yet oddly claustrophobic. Lily stood still and listened. There were no obvious footsteps, no voices, no sudden movement, only the muted hum of distance. She took a few steps, then stopped again, scanning corners, shadows, and blind spots with the practiced vigilance of someone who had learned that privacy is never a guarantee. She reminded herself why she had chosen this place. Few people came here, fewer still would expect her here. That logic should have settled her, yet the very emptiness of the location turned into its own warning. If anyone appeared in a place like this, it would mean they had a reason. Lily retrieved her phone and checked her signal, her call app, her notes. She felt steadier looking at the plan on her screen, the structured bullet points and careful phrasing she had prepared. It was easier to trust words you had written yourself than the unpredictable expressions on other people's faces. She adjusted her posture and began the call. Her voice was controlled from the start, firm, though deliberate. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She moved directly into the substance, outlining terms, timing, and consequences. The strategy was sensitive, the kind of idea that could reshape corporate alliances and personal vendettas at the same time, because in Genoa City those two worlds were always tangled. As she spoke, Lily felt the familiar tension between her public self and her private fear. Publicly, she was a force. Privately, she was carrying the knowledge that one wrong step could invite retaliation from people who didn't lose gracefully. Still, she stayed focused, keeping her sentences clean, pushing forward. Then the discomfort returned stronger now, sharper, as if the air behind her had changed temperature. Lily kept talking, but part of her attention slipped away from the call and into the space around her. She shifted her weight, taking a small step backward without meaning to. Her eyes flicked to the side, then forward, then toward a darker edge of the area. She caught a sound soft, ambiguous, nearly nothing. It could have been the wind. It could have been a shoe on ground. The problem was that her body reacted before her mind could categorize it. Her heartbeat accelerated, and she hated how quickly her control threatened to fracture. She didn't end the call immediately. Panic can be loud, and Lily refused to hand anyone the satisfaction of seeing her unravel. But she tightened her grip on the phone, choosing her words more carefully, shortening her points, trying to finish the most critical information before whatever was happening became unavoidable. She was only a breath away from wrapping up when the presence finally revealed itself. Victor stepped into view with a calm that felt almost insulting. He didn't rush. He didn't announce himself. He simply appeared, as if the space belonged to him and Lily's alarm was a minor inconvenience. The shock hit Lily like a flash of ice through her bloodstream. For a fraction of a second, her mind went blank not because she couldn't think, but because the number of possible meanings was too large to process all at once. If Victor was here, he hadn't stumbled into her. He had found her. Lily ended the call instantly. The screen went dark, and the silence that followed seemed to expand, pressing into her ears. She lifted her chin, letting her eyes sharpen instead of widening. She refused to look startled, refused to give him that victory. Still, she could not stop the question burning behind her calm. How much did he hear? Had he arrived too late to catch anything useful? Or had he been close enough for longer than she realized? The thought that her private words might now be in his possession made her stomach tighten. Victor's expression was composed, but Lily caught something small in its surprise, perhaps, at how quickly she reacted, at how smoothly she shut the door on her own vulnerability. Lily watched him the way she would watch a chess opponent, not for the obvious move, but for the intention behind it. He offered an explanation, something vague and convenient, a few sentences that tried to turn the moment into coincidence. Lily heard the words and rejected them immediately. Victor rarely did anything without calculation. In this town, his coincidences were usually traps wearing polite clothing. Lily kept her face still. She made herself breathe slowly, as if she had all the time in the world, as if she was not standing in the middle of a violation. That was what this felt like, not merely an interruption, but an intrusion into a space she had carved out of chaos. She held his gaze with the kind of calm that is forged from anger. Her anger was not explosive. It was precise. It didn't want to scream. It wanted to understand. Because understanding would become leverage. The confrontation tightened between them without needing raised voices. They spoke in implications, in careful phrasing, in the subtle testing of boundaries. Victor's presence was pressure. Lily's refusal to bend was pressure back. Every moment stretched like a wire pulled taut. Lily felt the temptation to lash out, to demand answers, to expose his lie on the spot. But she had learned that confronting Victor head-on was rarely as effective as letting him reveal himself through his own impatience. So she stayed controlled, allowing silence to do part of the work. Inside, however, her thoughts were racing. If Victor had found her once, he could find her again. If he had found her, then her secret location was no longer secret, which meant someone had led him to it, or someone had reported her pattern. or someone had been watching long enough to memorize her movements. Lily felt the edges of suspicion begin to scrape at her trust in everyone around her. She hated that too. She hated how easily Victor's presence could poison her sense of safety, could make her question whether her own circle was secure. That, she realized, might be the point. Victor didn't need to destroy her plan immediately. He only needed to shake her confidence hard enough that she would start destroying it herself. Another thought cut through, colder than the rest. Adam. Lily didn't see him, but she felt the possibility of him the way one feels a storm coming before the clouds roll in. Victor seldom operated alone when a layered strategy could serve him better. Lily's eyes flicked briefly toward the perimeter, not obvious enough to betray fear, but quick enough to confirm her own instincts. She saw nothing, and that emptiness was not comforting. It suggested either that no one else was there, or that someone else was skilled enough to remain unseen. Lily's anger sharpened into determination. She refused to be reduced to a startled woman clutching a phone. She was not a victim in her own story. She straightened her shoulders and allowed her tone to remain steady, measured, unbroken. She made it clear without theatrics that she was not fooled by thin explanations and that she understood the implication of his arrival. Victor's calm wavered just slightly, not in fear, but in adjustment, as if he was recalculating the strength of the person in front of him. Lily could feel that. She could feel him realizing that she was not the kind of opponent who collapsed under pressure. She was the kind who absorbed pressure, transformed it, and sent it back. Still, Lily also knew when to withdraw. There is a difference between retreat and surrender, and Lily had always understood that survival often means choosing the moment you refuse to speak further. The longer she stayed, the greater the chance she would reveal something information, weakness that Victor could use later. Victor was here because he wanted something. Maybe it was the details of her plan. Maybe it was the satisfaction of reminding her that he could reach her anywhere. Maybe it was both. Lily refused to feed that hunger. So she ended the confrontation the way she ended the call, decisively. She moved to leave without offering him the emotional reaction he likely expected. She didn't storm away. She didn't tremble. She walked with controlled speed, but inside her chest the storm was building, not fading. Each step back toward her car felt like stepping away from a moment of danger and into a larger war she hadn't realized had already begun. When she reached the car, she paused for a fraction of a second before getting in, not because she was unsure, but because she wanted to look back just once. Victor remained behind her, still and composed, watching. Lily met his gaze from a distance. She didn't glare. She didn't plead. She simply looked at him the way someone looks at a locked door right after discovering it had been opened. Her eyes said what her words did not. She understood the message. And she was already planning her response. She got into the car and shut the door, and the sound of it felt like a boundary being drawn. But boundaries are fragile in this city, and Lily knew that closing the door didn't restore safety. It only gave her a temporary shell to think inside. She started the engine, her hand steady on the wheel, though she could feel a faint tremor in her fingers that made her jaw tighten with self-disgust. She hated that her body could betray her, that adrenaline could seep into her muscles even when her mind was insisting on control. As she drove away, she didn't play music. She didn't make another call. She let the silence become her workspace. She replayed the moment again and again, not to torture herself, but to extract every possible detail. How had Victor approached? From what direction? How long might he have been nearby? Had she noticed any earlier signs that she dismissed too quickly? She revisited her own behavior, searching for the exact second her instincts first sounded the alarm. She was angry at herself for doubting that alarm. She was also angry at the reality that Victor could still invade her space without warning, as if the rules of privacy were optional for people who believed they owned the board. Lily's mind returned to the content of the call. She had been careful, but careful does not mean invulnerable. Even fragments of information could be powerful in the right hands. Victor didn't need a full plan, he only needed a hint. Lily imagined him taking a single phrase and turning it into a lever, using it to apply pressure where she was weakest. The idea made her throat tighten. She forced herself to think practically. If the channel was compromised, she would have to change it. If the location was compromised, she would have to abandon it. If her pattern was compromised, she would have to rewrite her routine entirely. And then the most corrosive thought returned. If Victor knew where she was, someone else might too. Someone had been watching, feeding, tracking, or reporting. Lily began to list possibilities in her head, not adding new faces, not inventing strangers, but mentally tracing the existing web around her. Who had enough access to notice her schedule? Who had enough motive to share it? Who would benefit from seeing her unsettled? In Genoa City, betrayal rarely arrives as a surprise. It arrives as a confirmation of something you didn't want to believe. By the time she reached a safer place, the initial shock had cooled into something more dangerous, a disciplined resolve. Lily didn't collapse into panic or self-pity. She sat down and began to reconstruct her own recent decisions with ruthless honesty. She questioned what she had shared, when she had shared it, and how she had shared it. She examined the small lapses, times she assumed she wasn't being watched, times she allowed herself to move out of convenience instead of caution. She refused to excuse herself with fatigue. Fatigue was real, but fatigue could also be exploited. Yet beneath the strategy, there was a quieter emotional truth that Lily could not entirely silence. She felt violated not in a dramatic sense, but in the personal, intimate sense of discovering that the place you chose to breathe freely had been entered by someone who didn't ask permission. She felt the sting of being reminded that power could dismiss her boundaries as if they were nothing. She had worked too hard to build her own authority to tolerate being treated like a girl caught sneaking around. That humiliation, even if she didn't show it, became fuel. Victor, she understood, had learned something too. He had seen her reaction, her speed, her composure. He had watched her choose silence over spiraling emotion. He had witnessed that she could be startled and still remain sharp. That mattered. It meant Victor would not underestimate her after today, not if he was honest with himself. But it also meant he might escalate, because powerful people do not enjoy encountering resistance that does not break. Lily held her phone again and stared at it as if it were both a tool and a threat. She wanted to call back and finish what she started, to prove that Victor hadn't knocked her off course. But she also knew that stubbornness could be its own trap. If someone was waiting for her to reconnect, waiting to see her scramble, waiting to intercept a second attempt, then making the call too quickly would be predictable. Lily's pride demanded movement. Her survival demanded patience. She stood, paced, then forced herself to stop pacing. She didn't need motion, she needed clarity. She reminded herself of the simplest truth. Victor's appearance was not random, it was a message. But messages can be answered. Lily was not powerless. She had resources, intelligence, resilience, and the ability to notice patterns other people missed. She had survived this city before. She could survive it again. Then, as her mind began to settle into a plan, one final detail surfaced, small, almost invisible, but sharp enough to reopen the entire wound. When she had turned away from the location, just before she reached her car, she had sensed a shift at the edge of her vision. Not Victor, something else. A movement that stopped the moment she tried to focus on it. A presence that did not step forward, did not retreat, but lingered like a confirmation. Lily had dismissed it in the moment because Victor was the obvious threat, the obvious focus. Now, in the safety of hindsight, that brief movement felt like the most terrifying part of all. Because it suggested that Victor might not have been the only watcher, and the real trap might not have been the interruption, it might have been the surveillance itself. The quiet tracking designed to measure her reactions. Lily's stomach tightened. She sat down again, no longer out of fatigue, but out of the sudden realization that the game might be larger than she thought. If there had been another set of eyes nearby, then Victor's entrance could have been stage setting, a controlled confrontation meant to flesh out how Lily would respond. If so, the person behind the trap didn't need Victor to win. They needed Lily to reveal how she defended herself. They needed her patterns, her instincts, her tells. Her phone vibrated. No name, no familiar number. Just an incoming call that seemed to arrive at the exact moment her suspicion sharpened into certainty. Lily stared at the screen, breath held, and understood that this was not a coincidence, not a random wrong number, not a harmless interruption. It was the next move. Whoever had set the trap was watching her even now, waiting to see whether she would answer, waiting to see whether she would flinch. Lily did not move immediately. She let the phone ring, her eyes hardening, her mind racing through consequences. And as the vibration continued, she realized the hook wasn't simply that Victor had found her secret place, it was that someone, somewhere, was now close enough to reach her at will. And they had just proven it. Lily left the encounter with Victor feeling like she'd walked out of a room where the air had been deliberately thinned. As if someone had tightened an invisible hand around her throat and then smiled when she tried to breathe through it. On the young and the restless, privacy was never a guarantee. It was a temporary illusion that lasted only until a powerful person decided it shouldn't. She didn't let herself panic, because panic was exactly what Victor counted on: people unraveling, people reacting, people begging to be guided. Lily refused to give him that satisfaction. What he had taken from her wasn't just a moment of control. It was the feeling that she could ever create a safe pocket for her plans and her children. And that insult burned, not loudly, but steadily, the way a coal burns when it's buried deep and fed by stubbornness. When she somehow learned the outline of Victor's fake kidnapping plan, the fury inside her didn't explode into impulsive revenge. It hardened into something colder and more useful. Victor's strategy wasn't about physically removing anyone. It was about manufacturing chaos so that everyone around him would surrender their judgment and cling to the loudest voice in the room. He didn't need a real abduction to win. He needed fear to do the work for him. Lily understood that immediately, and she also understood the second layer: a plan like that was never meant to test only her. It was meant to expose the shape of the people around her, especially the ones who claimed to love and protect her. The moment Lily saw the doorway this created, she stepped through it with a decision that made her feel both powerful and ashamed. Because she knew what she was about to do would hurt someone who didn't yet realize he was being measured. She thought of Cain, his concern, his instincts, the way he could be steady one moment and reckless the next. The way his devotion could look like love but sometimes felt like possession when pressure rose. Lily didn't want to believe she needed proof of him. Not at this stage, not with children involved, not with history already heavy between them. But the reality of Genoa City was brutal. If she didn't learn the truth about Cain's core under stress, Victor would learn it for her, and Victor's lessons came with collateral damage. Lily couldn't afford to be sentimental. Not now. Not when her children's future was the thing everyone claimed to care about, yet so many people treated like leverage. Lily's first battle was against herself. She wanted to pick up the phone and demand reassurances, to force Cain to promise he'd do anything for the family, to trap him in words that would make her feel safer for an hour. But Lily had learned the hard way that promises spoken in calm weather were cheap compared to choices made in a storm. If she was going to test Cain, she needed him unprepared. She needed the raw person underneath the controlled surface. She hated that thought even as she accepted it. It made her feel too much like Victor designing a situation, watching from a distance, turning emotion into data. Lily told herself the difference was motive. Victor engineered fear for power. Lily engineered fear for protection. The distinction mattered to her conscience, but she couldn't pretend it made the act gentle. So she built her counterplay with meticulous restraint. She didn't invent new people. She didn't create extravagant complications. She simply took the framework Victor intended to use and refined it into something sharper, more believable, more psychologically exact. She released confusing hints into Cain's orbit, small fragments that suggested she and the children were being watched, that something was closing in. That safety had become a question rather than a certainty. The genius of it, if she allowed herself to name it, was that the hints weren't dramatic. They were subtle enough to feel real, because real danger rarely arrives with a theatrical announcement. Real danger arrives as a series of unsettling details that never quite form a complete picture until it's too late. At first, Cain tried to dismiss it. Lily could almost feel him doing what she had done earlier, forcing logic onto the uneasy sensations, telling himself that stress was making everyone paranoid. But the hints persisted. A pattern that didn't make sense, a timing that felt wrong. A silence where there should have been clarity. Lily kept control of the flow, careful to prevent Cain from grounding himself in alternative explanations that might calm him down. She didn't want him to solve the puzzle. She wanted him to feel the pressure of not being able to solve it. That pressure was the crucible. In it, people either became steady or became dangerous. As hours turned into longer stretches, Cain's mind began to fill in the gaps with fear. Lily didn't need to hear his words to know it. She knew the type of man he could be when the people he loved were threatened, how quickly he could become frantic, how easily he could mistake motion for effectiveness, how desperately he could reach for control. Lily's stomach tightened as she watched the shift happen. Part of her wanted to stop, to step in and end it, because she wasn't cruel by nature. She was simply exhausted from being forced to live on guard. But she didn't stop, because the stakes were larger than her discomfort. If Cain broke in a controlled test, how would he behave in a real crisis? If he acted recklessly now, what would he do when the consequences were irreversible? Cain's anxiety intensified, and with it came a familiar Genoa City pattern: isolation. Under pressure, people narrowed their world to the one thing they were afraid to lose. Lily allowed that narrowing to happen. She let Cain drift away from other sources of information, other points of balance, until he was alone with his own spiraling urgency. The deeper he sank into that tunnel, the more likely he was to expose what Lily needed to see, whether his love was rooted in responsibility or in ego, whether he protected by thinking or by charging, whether he listened or simply decided. Watching him, Lily felt a conflict that clawed at her ribs. She wanted to believe in him. She wanted to believe that when the worst arrived, Cain would become the kind of man who made hard choices calmly, who shielded the family without turning their lives into a wildfire. But what Lily began to see instead was the first crack: Cain's tendency to act before thinking when fear reached a certain pitch. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that care in him could become a force that drowned out judgment. Lily recognized the danger in that. Victor's entire power came from predicting how people behaved when emotion overtook reason. A man like Cain, loving, intense, reactive, could become Victor's easiest tool if he wasn't careful. The longer Lily held the line, the clearer Cain's weaknesses became. He made decisions that were visibly flawed, not because he was malicious, but because he was desperate. He reached for solutions that felt immediate and dramatic because drama gave him the illusion of control. He seemed willing to gamble with consequences if it meant he could feel like he was doing something right now, in this moment, to save Lily and the children. Lily's throat tightened with a bitter blend of anger and sadness. She didn't want to punish him for loving them. She wanted to protect them from the kind of love that can accidentally destroy what it tries to save. Still, Lily didn't end it yet. She pushed the performance toward its climax with the quiet precision of someone who understood that the most revealing point is the moment of forced choice. She arranged the pressure so that Cain would feel he had reached a fork, one path that demanded sacrifice, restraint, and patience, and another path that offered a fast, volatile sense of heroism. Lily needed to see which path he would take when there was no time left for debate. In that moment, love stops being a feeling and becomes a behavior. Cain reached that edge and Lily felt her own heart strain because she wasn't watching a stranger. She was watching a man connected to her children's stability, to her own history, to the fragile hope that family could still mean something solid. The tension inside Lily became almost unbearable because she was both the architect and the witness. She had created the storm, and now she was watching someone she cared about get battered by it. She reminded herself again that she wasn't doing this for sport. She was doing it because the world around them had become predatory, and she refused to be the only one thinking ahead. When the situation peaked, Lily stepped out of the shadows of her own design. Her appearance wasn't triumphant. It was heavy, deliberate, and unavoidably final. Cain saw her, and whatever emotions surged through him, relief, anger, betrayal, fear, they collided at once because he had believed that the danger was real. Lily held her ground. She didn't soften immediately. She didn't rush to soothe him. She forced herself to stay steady long enough to do what she had set out to do, end the game and reveal the truth. She exposed the structure plainly, without adding new twists, without theatrics. Victor had intended a fake kidnapping scheme. Lily had learned of it. Lily had turned it into a more sophisticated trap, not to endanger anyone, but to measure Cain's core response under pressure. She didn't say it with pleasure. She said it with a hard seriousness that made it clear she understood the moral weight of what she had done. Lily's eyes didn't ask Cain for forgiveness. They demanded comprehension. Because forgiveness could come later, if it came at all. What mattered now was that Cain faced the consequences of his choices in the storm he had believed was real. Lily watched Cain absorb the truth, and she felt the ache of it inside her like bruising. She knew he would feel manipulated. He would feel humiliated. He would feel as if Lily had used the children as a testing tool, even though Lily had designed everything to keep them safe and distant from actual harm. Lily didn't deny the emotional damage. She also didn't retreat from the necessity. In a town where Victor Newman could weaponize fear with a phone call, Lily couldn't afford to keep guessing about the people closest to her. Guessing was the luxury of calmer lives. From that confrontation, Lily drew her final conclusion about Cain, not a simplistic verdict, but a nuanced truth. Cain's love was real, his fear was real, his willingness to act was real. But so was his vulnerability to panic, his tendency to equate urgency with strength, his risk of making everything worse while believing he was saving it. Lily understood, in that moment, that Cain could be a protector and a liability at the same time. And in Genoa City, that combination could be fatal if the wrong person pressed the right buttons. Lily didn't use her conclusion to punish Cain. She used it to reshape the boundaries of their relationship. She realized she could not base her children's safety on emotional promises or on Cain's impulsive devotion. She would have to control sensitive information more tightly, reduce the opportunities for Victor to exploit cracks, and establish a structure where Cain's instincts could not override careful planning. Lily's heart didn't like it because it felt like downgrading someone she had wanted to trust fully. But Lily's mind didn't hesitate. Trust without proof was how people got destroyed here. And yet, even as she reclaimed a sense of control, turning Victor's idea into her advantage, forcing clarity from chaos, another chill crept in beneath her skin. If Lily had somehow learned Victor's plan, Victor could somehow learn that Lily had learned it. Victor wasn't the type to tolerate his own trap being stolen and repurposed. He didn't simply dislike resistance, he took it personally, as an insult to his identity as the man who always stayed ahead. Lily looked at Cain, still shaken, still trying to recalibrate his understanding of her, and she realized something terrifying. Her test had exposed Cain's weaknesses, but it had also exposed Lily's willingness to play in the same arena as Victor. That wasn't just intelligence in Victor's world. It was a declaration of war. Lily kept her face composed, but her thoughts were sharp and fast. Would Victor retaliate by targeting Cain now that Cain's vulnerabilities were obvious? Would Victor target Lily for daring to outmaneuver him? And worse, would Victor decide that a fake kidnapping wasn't enough anymore, that the only way to reassert dominance was to turn the fake into something frighteningly real? Lily didn't allow herself to voice those fears, because speaking them felt like inviting them to happen. Instead, she focused on the only thing she could control, her next move. That was when her phone vibrated. The timing was too perfect, too precise to be random. Lily's gaze dropped to the screen and found no familiar name, no comforting identifier, just an incoming call that sat there like a quiet threat. In that instant, Lily understood that the true hook wasn't what Cain had revealed about himself, and it wasn't even the fact that she had flipped Victor's scheme. The hook was the possibility that someone had been tracking her steps so closely they could reach her at the exact moment she thought she'd regained the advantage. Lily stared at the ringing phone, feeling the air in the room tighten again, and realized that the next act might not be hers to script. On our TV Spoilers channel, I always seek content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting perspectives. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.